Hello, this is Rachel New, dating and relationships coach in London, and I'm here with Vanessa Potter, who is a local author in Crystal Palace. So welcome, Vanessa.
Hello.
So you're here to talk about your second book, Finding Your Right Mind, which has just been published by Trigger Publishing, available in all local bookshops, particularly Bookseller Crow. We must make a plug for them in Crystal Palace. So I've just read the book. It took me about 4 days to read. Fantastic book. Couldn't put it down. So thank you for that, Vanessa. So we're here to talk about how meditation has an impact on relationships. So this includes all kinds of relationships, your family, your friends, romantic relationships, and work colleagues get a few mentions in the book as well. So if you think anything about your relationships that you think could possibly be improved, then perhaps meditation might be the answer. So Vanessa has experienced the various effects of meditation on her relationships at first hand through an experiment of 10 different types of meditation and their various effects. In the book, you have your brain activity measured with some kind of headset.
Super flattering.
So this was to collect data on brain activity, alpha waves, and that kind of thing. And you also recorded your own subjective reports of how you found the meditation on various different measures. And then the book is also your personal journey, your relationships with your family and friends and work colleagues and so on, and how the meditation had an impact on all of those. So this interview is, as the book, is designed for people that are interested in the science, but also people that are interested in personal development. And in particular, we want to focus on self-care and how that impacts on our relationships. So the thing that I enjoyed most about the book is, your inner journey and how it affected your relationships and, things that you learned about yourself. So, how would you sum that up? And also you had to do a lot of, obviously, keeping a journal, reporting on how you're feeling and writing the book up. So in terms of the impact it had on you, to what extent was it the meditation that was impacting on your self-care, and to what extent was it just the process of writing everything down and reflecting on everything, would you say?
Well, obviously, those are two channels that are going to provide data for me. The meditation itself, it's a physical experience, so there was a tangible impact of that. Often, if I do a meditation, I feel more grounded, I feel more relaxed, I feel calmer afterwards. The journaling was more, I suppose, insights. And what often happens in a meditation practice is that you can quite quickly bump up to your past. You can bump into traumatic experiences, you can bump into habitual patterns of behavior. And so the journaling is really helpful to kind of literally see that on paper. If when we confront something, a big part of that is actually then acknowledging it. And if you write it down, it becomes real in a whole new, different way. And then you can look at it and reflect. And so that was the kind of the cognitive side, if you like, the processing. And also, when you spot patterns, it's really useful because then you can see how those patterns of behavior are cyclical and how they've been cyclical perhaps your entire life. And then you start to understand where they've come from. But then you've got the power to do something about it and to make some changes and some tweaks. And so having the kind of diary and journaling side is really helpful. It informs the meditation, and in fact, to a point, it can even guide where you take that meditation, whether you explore different techniques because of things that have come up through the process of diary, writing it all down.
Yeah, so I guess meditation is more meaningful if you have got those kind of focus on different things or goals or intentions or whatever, rather than just the sort of general, I need to relax more, because there's if it's focused on one particular thing, then that can be more useful. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think journaling isn't everybody's thing. For some people it might be talking. Some people want to write it down, some people need to talk. And for others, it could be an artistic expression, that you can express in lots of different ways. That sort of inner knowledge, those insights can manifest in many ways. I don't think we have to be too prescriptive. But I think journaling, even if you just write odd words, so part of the experiment, I had to write keywords down so they can do keyword searches. And so I'd have to describe, the essence of my feelings that day. That was really interesting. If you say to yourself, what's your 3 keywords for today? And you're like, ooh, because you don't think about these things. So it's kind of interesting. So, I might go tired. Oh yeah, actually I'm feeling quite tired today. And then that gives you a little bit of, awareness, but also makes you a bit kinder to yourself. You go, hang on a minute, you're feeling a bit tired, and that's okay. There's reasons for that. So maybe we need to scale our day down a bit. Maybe we can be a bit kinder to ourselves later in the day and not squeeze all these things in. So that it gives you an extra layer of self-awareness, and that self-awareness is informing how you help yourself.
I think that's interesting about being kind to yourself, because they say that if you're not being kind to others, it's really because you're not being kind to yourself. So which comes first, would you say?
When you do a meditation practice, one of the really difficult things is the truths that come out. And because you get this perspective, this stand back from your life, and you start to see how everything plays out, and you start to have this empathy as well for other people and their troubles, and their emotions and their thoughts that might be going through their mind. And you start to see, oh my goodness, right, this comes from me. So if I want, particularly with children, if I want my children to behave politely, nicely, if I don't want them to shout, then they model my behavior. Then I can't do that. You can't say, don't shout, don't do this, don't, be mean to your brother when I'm, if I'm being aggressive or, in a bad mood. And so whenever I've changed my behavior, they mirror it. End of. It's just really hard remembering it, because you still fall into the same cycles and the same habits, they're fairly ingrained. But even if you manage to just rein up a few times and do it a little bit, then you see instant results, and that's very encouraging. So the more you do it, the more beneficial that is to those around you. But yeah, starts and ends with you, I'm afraid.
And I think there was a lot in your book about you finding that you weren't being kind to yourself, that you were criticizing yourself, being really pushing yourself, being really hard on yourself. And I think a lot of people do that. So did the meditation help with that?
Yeah, the first part of that is just the awareness. So I didn't do an awful lot of reading up on meditation before I did the experiment, because I didn't want to bias my experiences. I didn't want to just replicate other people's experiences or expectations of my experience. So I only did that afterwards, but I was amazed about what came up with the kind of critical self-talk. Sharon Salzberg is a great writer. She writes a lot about this. And I'd kind of always had this assumption that I didn't beat myself up. I don't hate myself, and I feel I have a lot of empathy for people, and a lot of sadness if somebody really hates themselves, because I don't know what that feels like. And so I kind of assumed that I wasn't mean to myself, but actually that was wrong. And when I got quite deep into a practice, what you start to understand is there's many influences and many kind of voices in your mind. I'm not talking like, schizophrenia. I'm talking just about those inner voices that guide us. And they're different from the chatter, the constant rumination and, whatever. These are quieter voices, and mine were very much in the background, and they kind of whispered. They didn't shout, which is why I don't think I'd heard it. But it was more, you're going to get that wrong. And they weren't really, really mean. They were just critical in terms of it won't be good enough. Classic imposter syndrome. A lot of women suffer from this. And I realized, oh my goodness, yeah, I had them. They were there. But I don't think I'd realized that. So that was it was disheartening, and it was sad. And I had to kind of be with that for a while. And then you've got to be careful, because, you've got to forgive yourself for being like that. The really big part of that is to forgive yourself for having that and being as human as everyone else. But yeah, that took a while for it to sink in. And meditation isn't a quick insight. Oh, I'll meditate today. I'll have 3 insights. Yeah. It's this drip, 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 drip. And actually what happens is they come back as well. It's a bit like waves. So another practice further down then brought all this stuff back up. But what it did is it brought it back up with new insights and a new layer of understanding. And now I have a much clearer kind of grasp of, what those voices are, how they all fit together. Because a critical voice is rarely there without a reason. They're normally there as a protector. And so that's how I view them. I kind of call them all protectors. This is the unconscious, is the emotional part of our psyche trying to protect us, because it's got a message that that's what it needs to do to make you survive. And it's just a mixed message. And so I have there's something called the internal family system, which is a psychological framework, which I find really helpful. It's this idea of lots of little people inside your head. And you might have quite a dominant person, so it might be a critical person here. But then behind, there's like a childlike voice that's going, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, behind it, And I think it's really helpful to start to listen to all of those voices and let them move apart and understand why they're there and welcome them. I mean, Rumi talks about welcome. Everybody's welcome. You're all in the house party in my head. I'm not sure I'm going too far with this, but I think it really helps to see it all and spread it out, and then you welcome them all, and then you understand it, and then that makes you much kinder to yourself.
Yeah, I think rather than repressing them, it's they've all got a valid point of view. It's just how much weight they're allowed to have. So maybe the voice that says, oh, this might go wrong when you're giving this talk could be useful, as long as you don't allow it to have too much, to speak too loudly. So I think that's interesting, and it also links in with the positive intelligence program with the saboteurs. The saboteurs start off good, and then they get too extreme, and then they become counterproductive. So that's another interesting program that people might want to look at.
Oh,
so if you haven't heard of that, I can put the link in the chat. Thinking about the idea of self-care, I mean, and also being kind to yourself, then which of the practices that you tried 10 different practices, and they all have various philosophies and various outcomes that may overlap, but were there any in particular that were particularly good if people want to work on their self-care? Is there any that you particularly recommend?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Kristen Neff runs a whole program on self-compassion, and she coined this term. So she's a researcher, meditation researcher. Well, actually, she not specifically meditation. She was looking into self-esteem, and this is quite different from self-love. And self-esteem is kind of goal-driven, and it's comparison, whereas self-love is unconditional. You just love yourself, whatever it is. And then the really critical word there is unconditional. And so she's done a lot of work in this field and has really brought it to the fore. And it's really important, because you literally can't. It's really hard to have a truly heartfelt, loving relationship with others if you've got, self-loathing or not enough self-love. And actually, I think one of the things that we don't realize is this is a kind of a muscle. The compassion muscle exists. You can flex it and get better at it, and you can train yourself to be compassionate. And so there's compassion meditations which target specifically this idea of being kind, and actually it's very simple. You wish yourself well. It's really simple, but it's incredibly powerful. And I'm all for exploration and experimentation, and and kind of adjusting something, turning the dial to suit you. And so there's some classic phrases that come with. It's called a loving kindness practice, and it's "May I be well," "May I be happy." For me, my word had to be "May I be safe." I realised very quickly that was really crucial. I didn't feel safe. And that was massive data for me. And you don't even go to the why don't you feel safe? It's just acknowledge, I don't feel safe. Okay, that's there. That's okay. We know that now. This is information. And so "May I be safe" is a really, really powerful mantra. It's an affirmation. You repeat it over and over. And the mind starts to respond, and it starts to open. It's a bit like a flower. And in Buddhist speak, in Buddhist terms, they talk about cultivating compassion. And cultivating, what's that? It means to grow. So I had in my mind, I'm very visual as well, I had a seed, and I had this little seed of compassion was in me, but there was nothing growing out of it. There's no green shoots anywhere. It was there because I'm human. And all of us have these seeds. But by doing this practice, I was watering it and I was nurturing it. And bit by bit, it would grow, and it came to the surface. And when it breaks through the surface, you know it. And that sense of connection to yourself is so powerful, and it literally broke everything apart for me in a really positive way. And in fact, actually, what sometimes can happen with compassion practices, is you open a floodgate. It can be a bit overwhelming to begin with, and then you learn to moderate it. But if you want to flex your own self-compassion muscle, then those practices are very, very powerful.
I think it's links in with the idea that before you're ready to relate to other people and to love other people, like you say, you've got to learn to love yourself. And it reminds me of some questions that I often use with my clients from a psychologist called Eric Fromm in the 1950s. The first he has 4 questions that are kind of different developmental stages in when you become ready for a relationship. And the first one is, do you believe you're worth loving? Which I think is quite a challenging question. And then, are you able to teach others how to love you? And then, do you have the humility to learn from others about how to love them? And finally, are you able to receive love from others? And I think it's interesting, because the self-care thing, if we don't work at that, then we're not going to be able to receive love from others. Did you feel more lovable? Did you feel more able to receive love from your friends and family?
Yeah, and there's another thing that kind of sits alongside that, is you start to recognize it. Because when if you travel through life, and I had this sense of numbness, of disconnect, and that was partly because of having a very serious illness and lots of other, built up reasons. But actually, I was surrounded by love, but I was pushing it away. So it's not even that you become, capable of being loved. All you have to do is just put your hands down and stop the barricade. And it was there. It was all there all along. And that was a very powerful experience. And also welcoming those little surges of love and compassion when they came, and not being frightened by them. Because I realized, because everything becomes data, becomes information. I realized I was quite intimidated, quite frightened by those feelings. They felt unsafe, back to that word again. And so I had to really work through all of that, which is difficult. It's emotional. And actually, to begin with, it's worth saying this, if anybody does start and investigates a loving kindness practice, if you feel absolutely nothing for several weeks, that's really not uncommon. And if you the way the practice works, you feel compassion towards yourself, and then it feeds out to other people. So someone close to you, someone neutral, someone you don't like, and then the world. And if you can't feel that for anybody, that's fine. The brain's very clever. You can pretend to feel it. You can just say it anyway, and that seed will start to grow. And that's the really powerful, brilliant thing about this. Even if you feel nothing, it will still work if you just repeat it, and their brain will start to understand and to grow that compassion, which is, and if you can't think of a person, you can think of your dog. Pets work, anything works. It's just the concept of compassion.
Yeah, I remember reading the bit where you say sometimes meditation doesn't touch the sides of my busy, stressed out mind, and it's like you're disconnected, you're numb. You describe it as being numb, and I think that's a very common experience for people, that feeling of being disconnected. So, but was that just about being too busy and needing to slow down?
So yeah, I mean, I, like everybody, seem to be. I live on a motorway. I think, I'm traveling at 80 miles an hour. And my analogy for meditation is it's a B road. You slow down, you can see the scenery. And and also there's also this this drive system, which is something I've come across more recently, that we have 3 different systems. We've kind of got the fight or flight, the sort of fear response. And then we've got this feeding, breeding, kind of nurturing, healing state. And then we have this drive, and the drive is what keeps us in that kind of emergency state all the time. And I realized, listen to the word drive, motorways, it's all there. So I've got my foot on the pedal. And part of a practice is learning to just ease up off that pedal, and you can work the analogy through. You can even slow the car down. You can even choose to get out the car. But even just going onto a B road and slowing down allows you to see. And the great thing is, you don't have to slow that much to start seeing lots. And so you get quite a lot straight away. And different practices do that in different ways. So I'm thinking of Kundalini yoga, which was a
Mm,
physical practice I
yeah.
did. And that was very clever because that did it by moving my body into awkward, uncomfortable positions and making me stay in a position with a perspective, physical perspective and a mental perspective that was different. And being in a different position and state opened the doors as well. So these practices can do it in lots of different ways. And Kundalini yoga engages a lot with the autonomic nervous system. It's very much driven by the emotional body. And it's very prescriptive. You can choose a practice. They're called kriyas, these movements, but they're often with meditation, they're with mudras, which are hand poses, and physical poses. And you can choose one for whatever it is that you're looking for and use it as a kind of a bespoke treatment. And so I really enjoyed Kundalini yoga for that. So they all did this in different ways.
Mm. I was thinking about, I made a list of all the different possible outcomes that you could get from meditation that you mentioned throughout the book. I'm just going to read them out because there's so many. It's just quite mind-blowing, but incredible. Letting go, inner peace, healing, focus, compassion, higher consciousness, being present, contentment, relaxation, reduced anxiety, connection, heightened awareness of your body and your mind, a more positive mindset, less reactivity, happiness, better sleep, less pain. Incredible list. Are there any, which ones would you say are particularly significant for you that you experienced?
Well,
How do they impact on your relationships as well?
well, yeah, absolutely. The one that was probably on my big sort of tick list, I need to really deal with this, is the reactivity. And that was very related to being busy, because the more busy I was, the more reactive I was to situations, because I didn't have that time to pause and slow and consider, all options. So reactivity was one of the things I worked on a lot, and that was very much to do with the relationships in the family. And there were different techniques that were really quite impactful for that. The one that springs to mind is Vipassana, which is a pretty extreme form of meditation, which requires going to a silent retreat for 11 days and living like a nun. You live monastically in silence, isolation, no eye contact, no physical contact, 10 hours of meditation a day. They get you up at 4 in the morning. I mean, it's pretty brutal. And whilst I didn't enjoy the monastic environment, the technique itself, goodness me, totally eliminated that reactivity. It really brought me down to this kind of baseline. And in fact, afterwards, it's actually eliminated that kind of volcano eruption anger, that boom.
Wow.
And that was weird, if I'm honest. It was spooky weird. It was kind of like, well, where's it gone?
Has
Because
that
it
been a
used to live.
long-lasting effect?
Interesting. I mean, I was curious to see if it would. I kept the practice off because it's a full-on practice. It's an hour morning and night. So inevitably the practice cut down. It lasted for about a month in terms of I literally couldn't find anger. Anger's definitely come back, but it's not with the same velocity and not with the same potency. And I see it coming. I see the situation and I can rein in better. I don't always succeed, but I succeed much, much more than I ever did before. Because meditation doesn't change you, it doesn't make you, some
little tweaks, isn't it?
it's little tweaks, and that's the other thing. But when you put all the little tweaks together, that can seriously help your relationships, because you learn new ways of communicating. You communicate in a different way completely, actually.
So did that affect your romantic relationship, your marriage, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because my husband has always been slightly eye-rolly about all of this. He's like, harumph, oh my God, what are you doing? What have you got yourself into? And it's interesting because when I did the compassion practice, I would have these little surges, these little like leaps of kind of love and compassion. And that was really lovely to kind of feel that. And that was a real connector. And also because I started looking at the family as a team, as a unit, we also introduced something called 10 minutes of sort of mind, body, soul time, which I learned from a parenting program. But we kind of involved this in quite a sort of a meditation way within the family. So we started doing a lot of things together, and that really helped my relationship with my children, but also with my husband, because we were doing things together. And I think the second you can do things together and have that connection, just, things fall into place.
And I think, as you say, with the reactivity, if you have that sort of moment where you're more self-aware of what's happening, that can obviously affect your relationship in a positive way.
Yeah, and it stops blame so much. I mean, we still have words, of course we do, like any other couple. And we've been through lockdown, and that's been tough. We've had to, reframe how the family works, and that's been challenging. But the good thing is, from my perspective, I have a load of tools, and the children have these tools as well. My husband doesn't do any meditation practice, I have to say. He's never kind of got involved with that, although I have started doing a few outdoor meditation practices with him, and he really actually enjoyed them and was surprised at how powerful and evocative they were. So I haven't given up on him yet. But my daughter independently, not all the time, she checks in, she does some meditation practices herself on her phone. And my son has loved a body scan that I introduced 3 years ago, nearly 4 years ago. We're still doing that. And my husband does that with him as well. And that's a lovely connection. I mean, he's 11 and he still asks for it. He loves it. It's important one-on-one time with us. It's relaxation. It's a whole load of sleep triggers. But yeah, that's been an enduring practice.
Is there any evidence on whether it's a gender thing, like do more women meditate than men, or is it a personality thing, or is it just finding the right practice for you?
Well, as far as I understand, more women meditate. I mean, you only have to go to the Mindful Living show. It was 95% women there when I went last. But yes, as I understand, more women meditate. And I think I don't know why that is, because actually a lot of the teachers are men. There seems to be a bit of an imbalance there. I think that's possibly because we're more connected to our kind of emotional side, and perhaps we see the benefits of this. I think there's still very much, annoying stigmas that it's not cool.
A bit embarrassing,
yeah. And also the problem with compassion as well, to take that, is that's seen as weak. And if you do that, you're going to be a pushover and people will take advantage of you. The research on that is absolutely the opposite. It actually makes you a better leader. It makes you a problem solver. It makes you creative, expansive. People like you more. It makes you better at communicating. So there's a lot of misconceptions still in the way, and I think that's a barrier to a lot of men that just kind of roll their eyes and go, "Oh, it's all woo woo," whereas it's not. Dan Harris is a good person. He really advocates men meditating, so he's done a lot for that.
I think there's different ways to express compassion. If you're just thinking about kind of an emotional aspect of it, then maybe that's more for certain kinds of people than others. But compassion can obviously be about action. The 5 languages of love, acts of service. Maybe for kind of more stereotypical men, it's more about doing things rather than feeling things. So maybe that's another barrier.
Yeah, I mean, a good step in the right direction is the random acts of kindness.
Yeah.
And that's such a fabulous concept.
Yeah.
And that's, anyone can do that. It's easy. You just do a kind act for someone who you don't know, and with no expectations in return. And yeah.
There's a quote in your book from Brené Brown: "We judge others in areas where we're vulnerable to shame." I thought that was a very interesting idea. That when we criticize people, it's often because we're really criticizing ourselves. Is there anything? Can you think of any examples in your family life where that might have impacted on?
Well, I mean, Brené Brown. Pretty much every sentence I read, I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah, her work on shame it's funny because when I first started reading it, I had a real sort of blocks with it. I'm like, I don't know what shame is. I don't understand it. And actually, it's only when you sit inside a meditation practice and you feel that, that you almost can't verbalize something inside your own mind. You go, oh my God, that's shame. That's shame.
I think for children especially, it's a useful principle, isn't it?
I think it's imperative that we learn more about shame and that we don't imprint and pass on shame. One of the things I try really, really hard to do is to keep reminding my children that we love them unconditionally and that they can make mistakes and their behaviors can be wrong and their choices can be wrong and not appropriate, but it doesn't affect how we feel about them. And they don't have to do anything to gain our love. And actually, even though you might feel that, it's really important you say it out loud and you put it on the table. And also that another thing is, and I was taught this before I did any meditation, really. I was taught this when my daughter went to primary school. It's the behavior that's wrong. And very much to make sure that you label that and you separate it from the child. So again, it's in the chimp paradox. Child runs out of school with a picture and shows you the picture. You push the picture to one side and go and hug them and look them in the eye and go, wow, how are you? I'm so pleased to see you. It's so lovely. You know, how was your day? You feel, you know, happy or sad. And then you go, oh, what's this?
Yeah.
And it changes their whole view of life and how they see themselves. It's really important.
I think a lot of problems in relationships are down to assumptions that we make about what we think the other person already knows. So like you say, people assume that their children know that they're loved unconditionally, but you know, there's no assumptions because kids are a blank slate. So we've got to create those assumptions. So,
and children are savvy. I mean, I said that to my children quite recently, and the older one went, yeah, I knew that. And she went, but thank you for reminding. Thank you for saying it, though. It's good to be told. You can tell me that again. You know, like they
always
say
remember
these
every
things.
single thing you say, don't they?
Oh,
gotta be so
absolutely. And I love the way she responds.
3 years ago.
yeah. And then, but the little one, the younger one, just went, And I did it very visually for him. I had a box here. This is the box. And then we've got some expectations. You've got some work to do. We need to sort out brushing teeth. We need to sort out homework and, you know, blah, 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 all this parenting stuff here. And some parenting's hard. And we're on your case because we're going to push you to be uncomfortable about things, but that's because you're going to grow. And I went, there's this other box here. And that's where we just love you. And it doesn't matter about any of that stuff. We'll love you, whatever. But we're still going to push you in 2 different boxes. Can you see the 2 boxes? And he went, yeah. It was great because he did, and he didn't say anything, but it totally went in the way that it does with 11-year-olds. And I shall keep reminding them of the box. And I think it helps with children to compartmentalize sometimes. I'm cross with you because you haven't had a shower in 2 weeks, but I still love you. Regardless of that.
I mean, it's always difficult to get that balance, isn't it, of how many negative points to pick up on in a day and how many to just leave. Do you feel like you've got more relaxed about all of those little niggly things?
Oh, like most parents.
Away
one day I'm good on it, another day I'm not. A lot of it I realize, and again, this is kind of the data collection that you do about yourself in the meditation practice, is if I'm tired, I am less resilient, I am less thoughtful, I can't cope with the noise and the life. I cope, less well. If I've got my practice and it's been very regular that week and I've had enough sleep, then I'm firing on all cylinders. I'm great. But that's not always the life, and there's stresses and there's things that come in, and then I have a week where I'm not so good. But then that's really important that you don't beat yourself up, because that's where it can sneak in, that judgment. You've got to go, cut yourself some slack. Yeah. Don't watch Netflix tonight. You need to go upstairs and give yourself that half an hour, recalibrate, and it'll all settle again. And the thing is, I know what to do, so I go and do that. And my family,
you've got that belief that it's going to work. I mean, I think for people that are listening that are new to meditation, we know that you don't get it's not a one-to-one cause and effect thing. You can't expect to do 10 minutes of meditation and see an effect straight away. Sometimes the effect is delayed. Sometimes you've got to do it for a week or more before you get the effects. But it always does, eventually does have some kind of an impact. So
it's exactly like learning to go and do a new exercise. If you want to get those benefits from running, going and doing a 2-minute run because you're starting off and doing that and expecting then to run a 5K at the weekend. That's not going to happen. You have to build up. And so I've got conditioning now. So I go upstairs and I can get into a meditative state within 10 seconds because I'm conditioned to do that. And I love it. And I can now sit very still and really grounded. And I go, it's like that. It's like Pavlov's dog. I do it straight away. But that's only because I've practiced. That's why it's called a practice.
Yeah, you've created new associations in your brain between, you sit in that particular chair, you're expecting to get into that state. Yeah. I think for a lot of people, you try meditation once, it doesn't work, so you give up and try a different one. But that's not going to help, is it? And as you say in the book, your mind often wanders crazily onto all sorts of other annoying thoughts. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to have a long-term impact. So how long should you persevere with a practice before saying, oh, I don't think this one's for me?
Well, I think it's really important to say, your mind is going to be like, an erratic puppy, or in my case, sometimes, a very angry Rottweiler. It can vary, but it's going to be busy, because life is busy. And that's not going to change by meditating. You just have a different relationship to that busyness. So that's the first thing. There's no clearing of mind. Don't forget that. I mean, there are some techniques that do that, but mostly you don't need to be bothered with that. If you can start a practice, you don't even have to go and sit and do a formal sitting meditation. You can do a walking meditation. You can just bring in some mindful moments into your day. That you can count that as a practice. And even if it's just, standing, chopping some vegetables, just ground into your feet, just be aware of your feet, even be aware of the fact that you're chopping. Come out your head. And that's so it's the idea of not being just a head taxi, that actually you've got a body attached to it. And what are the hands doing? They're chopping. What are the feet doing? These incredible feet, they've held you up all day. Let's just put a moment into your feet. That's practicing. And that's awareness training. And the more you do that, the more that will build.
Yeah, so rather than wait until the end of the day to say, I've got half an hour to meditate, do like 1 minute here and there throughout the day.
And there's lots of exercises that are really simple, and you can slowly build it up. And you can put little reminders on your watch or your phone, just do something, and maybe, if you're sitting on a bench having your lunch, you can close your eyes just for a minute and just you can do a little bit of mindfulness of the breath, but just for a minute. And all of this will build together. In terms of jumping around, no, it's not great to go from practice to practice to practice, but it's also okay to try something for a week. Like a lot of people don't like mindfulness of the breath, because if you've got any breathing conditions or any kind of trauma, that can bring it up really quickly, and it's just not comfortable. So you don't persevere. Try something else. Try one, and there are 300 different meditation practices and lots of different styles. And if you don't get on with mindfulness, mantra, like a transcendental meditation practice might be good, or a more physical one. If you're a physical person, if you've done some yoga, Kundalini yoga is great, because you actually physically move, and there's a lot of kind of expression that happens within those movements. So, it's absolutely fine to see what works for your personality.
What about when you're about to have an argument? I mean, that's always you see red, I give people lots of tips for how to argue, but in the heat of the moment, it's very hard to not have that reactivity, not to say the wrong thing or whatever. Is there any way that mindfulness or any of the other meditation practices could help? Could you, take a step back from the argument? And has anyone tried that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you get in a practice is this ability to have this space, this pause. And I think once you're in an argument, meditator or not, you're probably going to be a bit lost. Once you're in there, it's very hard to pull out. The trick for me is to not get in, is to mediate while you've got still a rational mind and your emotions are ready. If you can see the emotion rising, you've then got a choice. Now, sometimes you'll just carry on because you feel, aggrieved, and you're just going to make your point. But I think if you've still got the space before the heat has built, that's where you've got the opportunity to jump in on yourself. And actually, one of the questions, I go back to my coaching days sometimes in these moments, and I say, what will I get? What do I get out of this? And it's a really good question. And if your answer is, well, I get to be justified and angry. Yeah, well, okay. You ask the question again. What does that get you? Okay. Oh, shut up. Okay. It makes me feel hot under the collar and cross, and I'll be cross all night, and I probably won't sleep. Okay. Right. Do you want that? So that can be a very good question. And forget the other person for the moment. What do you get out of this?
And I think there's every couple has conflicts that last throughout your relationship that you're never going to resolve. You know, one person does this one way and the other person wants to do it another way. But it's good to just have a sort of light-hearted approach to those conflicts and be able to laugh and smile about them. You know, oh, we can never agree on what to watch on TV, or she wants to take the children to church and I don't, or whatever it happens to be. And if we could, maybe a mindful approach to that, to just relax and just accept that that conflict exists rather than constantly fighting it, because you're never going to win it.
Yeah,
I think that could be quite useful.
Yeah, one of the really useful practices that I learned, because there's a lot of practices for dealing with difficult people and for volatile relationships, and there's quite specific ones, and they're really helpful. And I remember the Dalai Lama writing about some of the, awful situations that the Tibetan people have experienced, and how do you manage that? How do you not hate? And he talks about seeing the person you've got conflict with as a human being, but more than that, as arms, legs, having a heart, cooking their dinner. And you see them in these very human terms. And so you can't relate in terms of their beliefs and what their behaviors, but you can relate. You find one bridge, and that's the flesh and bone bridge. Literally, they've got lungs, they've got a heart. And actually, and if you visualize that and work with that, that's really powerful, because it takes the sting out of anger. And it also allows, and this is a really crucial thing about meditation and a revelation if you get into a practice, your reality is not the only one. It's like, wow, that was just like mind-blowing for me. And
I think you can only accept that when you've got to a certain level of being at peace and completely relaxed and not holding on to things.
Yeah, and that in itself changes everything. And also, when you become on first name terms with your inner critic and your voice, and you see how it makes you behave, you then understand that other person's doing exactly the same as you. And that's another bridge. And so you start to see it all in very human terms and less about behavioral terms. It's much more kind of flesh and blood, and that makes you then have forgiveness. And the second you've got acceptance and understanding and a little bit of forgiveness, then you start to get to a place where you can talk to somebody, or there's a bridge, and that's very, very powerful. But yeah, and realizing that they have a reality, and for them that is the only reality, is, oh my gosh, it's such a useful thing to know.
I mean, I think finding, an overlap between your realities, as some shared reality, there's always something, isn't there? I mean, all the research on intergroup contact shows that, it's about to take on the perspective of someone else. You need to have those conversations where you just get to know each other and you find some common ground, and that becomes your point of shared humanity, and that becomes more important than the hurt and the conflict and everything that you disagree on. So I think, in a relationship, interpersonal relationship rather than an intergroup relationship, the same applies. You focus on the positives, you focus on the things you've got in common, focus on the shared experiences. Couples that whose relationships are successful often will talk about, oh, do you remember that holiday we had and we did this shared thing together? Then they might be in the middle of having an argument, but then they refer to some shared experience and they can laugh about it. So that kind of thing where you reset the dial so that you've got more of a balance of positive things that you're thinking about rather than the things that you disagree on.
Yeah, and if you incorporate those elements into a practice, which is what the Dalai Lama did with this particular practice, so you are giving your full attention. You're not just having this as a transient thought during the day. You're actually going into that and really working with it. And that's what you do in a practice. You work on these concepts. Then that concept grows and it gets some weight and some strength around it. And then, like everything, that's part of the training, part of the habit forming. So you start to create a new habit of when you look at a difficult situation, you instantly, like you say, you look for the connections, you look for the bridges, and that can transform relationships.
Yeah, because our brains are constantly biased towards the negative. And
of course,
when you think of a situation, whether it's a relationship or your work life or whatever, you know, what comes to mind first, you can train yourself to change that. It's just creating new pathways in the brain, isn't it? And allowing those negative pathways to disintegrate. I always think of it as like a field with grass, and you walk backwards and forwards across the grass and you create a pathway. Another pathway that you've been using for years where you're focusing on the negative, you can allow that grass to grow back if you don't think about it so much. You know, it's your choice, isn't it? And then, like you say, you're telling the body, that's what the body doesn't know one way or the other. You tell your body what it should be feeling. You tell your body, this is actually a positive thing. There's lots of positives about this situation.
Yeah, and the pathway and the grass. I mean, I remember explaining that to a neuroscience student, and she was like, "Wow, that's so cool!" Because actually, it's a really great analogy. And you can really play with it because and if you go on a new path, the grass will get a bit bent, but it won't. It'll spring back, won't it? You've got to keep going down it, and also the big path is still going to be really grooved and wide. You can get a truck down it, and it's a small path, but you've still got so the attention awareness is to stand at the front of all of them and look, and that's the expansiveness. Look left and right and go, ha 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 ha, not going down that one, going down that one. And one of the things, one of the practices I did was about a morning focus, and a lot of meditations are morning based, and for good reason, because we have a natural negative bias in the morning. How many people wake up with that feeling in the gut of their stomach, just and all the things that are wrong with the day? And it's a really interesting exercise to train yourself to flip it and go for 3 positives, 3 things you're grateful for. And so gratitude practices in the morning can change your day because you don't start off with that negative bias, and you are fighting our kind of human instincts, but it's really powerful when you do it, and there's an obvious shift.
I think, what you do in the first hour, they call it the power hour, what you do in the first hour of your day sets the tone for the rest of the day. So instead of scrolling through social media and reading negative things in the news, as you say, why not start with some kind of gratitude meditation practice, and then maybe you go outside for 10 minutes and enjoy some fresh air or whatever it is. But, set the tone for the day, have a nice conversation with your partner, give your children a cuddle, whatever, rather than crazily rushing around and just focusing on all the thoughts crowding in about all the things you've got to get through.
And actually, you mentioned a very important thing, circadian rhythms, and particularly with women. If we go outside and stand in daylight for a few moments, our whole body clocks reset. And those circadian rhythms are so critical. So yeah, and it's also worth saying, it doesn't have to be a half an hour gratitude practice. It can be a 4-minute one, and there's loads on Insight Timer. There's loads of really short ones for exactly that. It's like a little boom. Cuddle your kid, cuddle your husband, whatever, cuddle your other half. 5 minutes of gratitude and go stand outside. We can go.
Yeah, and then have some breakfast. Sounds great. So in terms of future projects, you've published the book now. So are you having a rest, or are you moving on to some other more new exciting meditation related project? Or
my life has changed. It's all minds and meditation and well-being, and I'm doing a forest bathing project, which I'm very excited. We're hoping to have got funding, and that's where I am going to be taking grumpy skeptics, actually people who think that this is all a bit woo-woo rubbish. I'm like, bring them on, give me your skeptics. I'm going to take them to Crystal Palace Park, and we are going to be walking around and doing a forest bathing session with a researcher from Derby University. This is her area. And forest bathing is interacting very consciously with nature. It's not getting wet or anything like that, but it is kind of like bathing in nature, would be a good way of describing it. And it seems really obvious. It's like, oh, I'll go to the park all the time. It's not the same thing. So we're doing it in a much more conscious way. And there are some really exciting research results that have come out of Japan, which is where this originated. And it's now feeding into Europe and the UK as a really exciting self-prescription model to help combat mental health, post-COVID. So it's a very exciting project that will turn into a podcast. So hear these grumpy skeptics wearing a heart rate monitor, being walked around the park, grumbling, coming at the end, hopefully feeling a little bit more expansive and possibly a bit surprised, but we shall see.
Could be an interesting thing to do before a date, because lots of people go to the park for their first date these days, having a walk in the park. So maybe they could do a forest bathing meditation before the date to get themselves into the right frame of mind, and then walk around the park again. Could be
I think absolutely forest bathing would be great.
Mm.
I'm starting a walking meditation group in Crystal Palace Park. Again, that would be a really nice thing to go to, a very relaxing way to ground yourself. And I think conversations that come after that would be really open and expansive and honest. And
great place to meet new people locally as
yeah,
well, which is
yeah,
something that I encourage people to do. Rather than just doing online dating, it's good to go to local events and meet new people. So yeah, it sounds like we could work together a little bit to promote that.
yeah, very excited about this. It's I see a really bright, exciting future.
Right, so you're online in lots of different places. We'll post all the links below. You have a podcast series that's already out, so you've finished the first series and then you're moving on to the second series. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yep, so it's called Finding Your Right Mind, and series 1 went out, and that was all on self-care. So lots of top tips on that. And then series 2 is all about women and women hitting a decade birthday, because I was hitting 50 this year and started to think about, my goodness, I'm very reflective, and does everyone else do this rumination, this kind of, looking back and looking forwards? And so I started asking women, and I have women aged from 20 to 90, and it's called 440 Years of Female Wisdom, because the insights and the wisdom that comes from these interviews is really quite humbling. It's beautiful. I'm so excited.
That sounds great. I look forward to listening to that. Well, thank you very much for joining me. So Vanessa Potter, we're just talking about her book, Finding Your Right Mind, available in all good bookshops and to be seen quite often around Crystal Palace. So look out for Vanessa, and hopefully as we start to open up after lockdown, there'll be more events outside and inside, and so we look forward to bumping into you again. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me.
Fantastic. Thank you.